A brisk November morning greets Caleb Moore as he pulls up weeds on his grandfather's front lawn, when an unfamiliar HOA agent takes a photo and walks away without a word. The air was sharp and smelled faintly of chimney smoke, the kind that clung to sweaters and lingered in the folds of early fall. Caleb yanked a stubborn clump of crabgrass from the base of the mailbox, tossing it into the old wheelbarrow beside him. Behind him, the porch creaked rhythmically, the sound of his grandfather's favorite rocker keeping time like a slow metronome. "You'd think raking leaves in your own yard wouldn't be a federal offense," Caleb muttered under his breath, brushing dirt from his palms. From the corner of his eye, a figure moved. A woman, dressed in a beige pantsuit so crisp it might have creaked on its own, stepped onto the sidewalk. Clipboard in hand, she paused in front of the house. Without a word, she raised a phone, took a photo of the small wooden sign Thomas had mounted decades ago, "More Residence, EST 1978, and then continued walking. Caleb stood still, brows furrowed. He turned toward the porch. Who was that? Thomas didn't look up from his newspaper. Karen Winslow. Head of the HOA. She's been circling since the leaves started falling. Caleb stared after her, the sound of her heels clicking against the pavement fading into the distance. He bent again to pick at a root, but his thoughts stuck on her silence. Not even a "good morning." By the afternoon, the sky had softened to a silver blue. Inside the kitchen, the scent of fresh coffee filled the air. Caleb poured a mug and set it next to Thomas, who was now on the sports section. "They still printing football scores in ink?" Caleb teased. Thomas grunted, appreciative. "Printed words don't change on you mid-sentence." When Caleb stepped back outside to grab a screwdriver from the van parked along the curb, he noticed a white envelope folded sharply and tucked into the mailbox. No stamp. No name. Just the blocky logo of the Brookpine Hills HOA. He opened it and read silently. Notice of violation, Section 3.4, Unauthorized Exterior Modifications. Infractions include unregistered signage and nonconforming porch flora. He looked up toward the porch. The only flora visible were two small hanging pots with marigolds, fading but still cheerful, and the wooden sign nailed beneath the flagpole. The same sign that had weathered hurricanes and 4th of July barbecues. "I haven't even unpacked yet," Caleb said aloud. Thomas, now standing behind him with the help of his cane, squinted at the notice. "Ah! That was quick. She just walked by. Didn't say anything." "That's her way," Thomas replied, folding the paper once and tapping it against his palm. "She'll cite you for the color of your gutters if she thinks the sun reflects wrong." Caleb exhaled through his nose and folded the paper with more force than necessary. He turned toward the van, an older whitework model he'd driven down from Atlanta, and then paused. A truck with a yellow light on top had pulled up behind it. A man with a clipboard of his own leaned against the hood. "You're not serious," Caleb muttered. The tow operator looked up. "Afternoon. You the owner of this vehicle?" Thomas stepped forward first. "It's parked legally. Been here 3 days. Got a call this morning," the man said. "Complaint about a commercial vehicle left curbside beyond the allowed window." Caleb clenched his jaw. "It's my personal van. I've got tools in it, yes, but I'm not running a business out of the driveway." The man shrugged, clearly not wanting to pick a side. "You might want to talk to the HOA. I'm just here on request." The van stayed, for now, but Caleb knew the message was sent. He watched the tow truck disappear around the corner, red brake lights flashing once before it was gone. As dusk settled, Caleb sat beside Thomas on the porch, both wrapped in flannel. The wind rustled the branches, leaves scattering like forgotten letters across the lawn. Caleb handed over a mug of pour-over, steam curling into the air between them. Somewhere down the street, wind chimes clinked like cautious laughter. Thomas folded the violation notice slowly and said, "Son, you may want to find the copy of the old deed, before she rewrites your rights." Caleb visits the old Magnolia Diner for breakfast, and finds out the neighborhoods had issues with Karen long before he arrived. The bell above the door jingled as Caleb stepped inside the old Magnolia Diner. The warmth hit him first, a comforting blend of coffee, sausage gravy, and old wood polished by decades of elbows and stories. A waitress with a pencil tucked behind her ear waved a pot of coffee in his direction. "More grits for you, Mr. Moore," she called cheerily, already pouring as if she knew the answer. He smiled and nodded, settling into a booth by the window. The vinyl creaked under him, but the view of the sleepy street lined with sugar maples was worth it. Across from him, Miss Evelyn was tucking a pink scarf into her coat as she stirred cream into her mug. Caleb recognized her from church the week before. She'd sat beside his grandfather, offering a steady stream of peppermints during the sermon. "That scarf's nice," Caleb said, nodding politely. In memory of Harold, she replied with a soft smile. "He always said pink made me look like spring, even in November." He returned the smile, then hesitated. "Mind if I ask you something about the HOA?" Her spoon stopped mid-stir. "If you're looking for praise, you've come to the wrong table." "Just trying to figure things out," Caleb said. "Got a notice yesterday for a sign and 2 flower pots." Felt abrupt. She let out a breathy laugh. Abrupt is Karen's love language. From the next booth over, a deep voice joined in. "She fined me $100 in 2018. Said my ceramic bird bath was a non-standard water feature." Mr. Darnell turned in his seat, his eyes sharp beneath a baseball cap that read, "Retired, not expired." Caleb glanced over with interest. "Was it painted like a flamingo or something?" Caleb asked. "Plain white. Bought it for Martha's birthday. 2 days after I installed it, Karen showed up with a measuring tape and that clipboard of hers." Evelyn chuckled. "I remember that. You moved it to your backyard, and she tried to claim rear visibility from the sidewalk." Darnell shook his head, the corners of his mouth twitching. "She got re-elected 'cause no one else wants the headache. Everyone who runs ends up leaving the neighborhood, or therapy." Sandra, sitting quietly beside Darnell, said nothing for a long while. She cradled her cup as if it were the only warm thing in the room. Caleb noticed her fingers tighten slightly. "She's been rewriting things," she said at last, barely above a whisper. Quietly. "Bylaws. Clauses. Mostly online." That caught Caleb's attention. "Online?" Sandra gave a small nod. "Website's member only now. Passwords change monthly. Most of us don't even bother logging in." Later that afternoon, back at the house, Caleb tried the HOA website. The homepage was glossy, all stock photos and smiling families. But every tab he clicked prompted a login screen. When he entered the credentials Thomas had scribbled years ago on an old sticky note, nothing happened. "Access denied." He leaned back in the desk chair, staring at the screen. There was something slippery about a system that closed its doors while rewriting the rules inside. He thought of Sandra's words, delivered so carefully, as if walls had ears. Just before sunset, Caleb returned to the diner. Evelyn's mailbox stood crooked at the edge of her yard, its red flag long rusted into place. He knocked gently, toolbox in hand. "You don't have to do that," Evelyn said, stepping out with an apron still tied at her waist. "You mentioned it was wobbly. Figured I had time before dinner." She watched him work, handing him screws and paint chips when asked. As they chatted, Caleb learned she'd received 3 separate citations in 2 years. All for the shade of her mailbox. First it was too turquoise, then not neutral enough, and finally inconsistent with community tone. "I stopped arguing," she said, smiling tiredly. "It's like playing chess with a mirror, you see every move coming, but it's still your reflection losing." As Caleb straightened and wiped his hands on a rag, Sandra approached from down the sidewalk. She didn't wave. She didn't speak until she stood right beside him. She glanced once over her shoulder, then pressed a folded piece of paper into his palm. "This might help. Just don't tell her I gave it to you." Back home, Caleb opened Sandra's note, a printout of a deleted HOA clause, and a hint that the HOA is exceeding its legal reach. The paper had been folded twice and sealed with a strip of Scotch tape. Caleb peeled it open carefully, flattening the creases on the kitchen table. The ink was slightly smudged at the edges, but the bold header stood out plainly: Section 3, Paragraph 2, Legacy Property Exemption. His eyes darted across the lines. It was an old clause, something about properties registered before 1995 being grandfathered against aesthetic regulation updates unless structural violations were proven. It cited county statutes and original plat surveys. It also had a digital annotation in the margin: removed, Revision 12.3, June 2022. Don't tell her I gave it to you. Sandra's quiet warning echoed in his mind. He took the note and walked out to the backyard, where the old shed leaned slightly left, its hinges rusted and paint faded into a sun-dulled gray. Caleb opened the door and stepped inside, brushing past a rake and a stack of old potting soil bags. With a deep breath, he knelt beside the workbench, dragging a dusty toolbox aside. This space would have to do. He cleared a corner and set the printout beneath the warm glow of a clamp light. A project was forming. Legacy exemption, he muttered. Why would they delete that? He didn't realize Thomas was behind him until the old man cleared his throat. Used to be we didn't need paperwork to prove common sense, he said, leaning on a wooden cane carved from cherry wood, a gift from one of his former students, who had once flunked math but grew up to become a craftsman. Caleb turned. You ever hear of this clause? Thomas squinted at the paper. That used to be standard. HOA wasn't always this formal. We had monthly cookouts instead of citations. Then Karen took over. When? 3 years ago. Right after her husband passed. Thomas shook his head. Never ran against anyone. Just stepped in when folks were too tired to argue. Caleb frowned. So this isn't just a new rule, it's an erasure. He spent the afternoon digging. At the county clerk's office, a kind woman named Denise pulled the original Brookpine Hills HOA charter from a metal drawer labeled B. It smelled like dust and time. Can't check this out, she said, but you're welcome to copy what you need. Caleb took photos with his phone, page after page. He found the original zoning documents, the amendments, the addendums, then noticed something odd. The newer files were digitally signed only by Karen. No co-signer. No voting record. By the time he got home, the November sky was already turning amber. He set up a folding table in the shed and booted up his laptop. Across from the printout Sandra had given him, he laid out a spiral notebook and titled the first page, HOA Inconsistencies, Phase 1. He worked in quiet focus, drawing lines between clauses, dates, legal language. Every few minutes, a squirrel darted past the open door, pausing just long enough to stare before disappearing again. Once, 2 of them chattered loudly near the gutters and sent a pile of brittle oak leaves tumbling into the shed. Glad someone thinks this is funny, Caleb muttered, brushing the leaves aside. Inside, Thomas shuffled in with 2 mugs of steaming cocoa. He didn't speak, just watched as Caleb built a spreadsheet and cross-referenced the zoning codes. They ever tell you what a quiet man can do when he's got a reason? Thomas asked eventually. Caleb glanced up. I'm starting to get the idea. When he opened his inbox later that night, a new message blinked at the top. No sender name. Just a subject line, friendly warning. The body of the email was brief. Stop digging, or we'll escalate. There were no attachments. No signature. Just those 7 words. He didn't reply. He didn't forward it. He just hit print, watched the paper slide out of the tray, and walked it straight to Thomas, who was settling in on the porch. Caleb held the sheet out wordlessly. Thomas read it, slow and deliberate. Then, with a quiet nod, he passed it back. Looks like I hit a nerve. At dawn, Caleb wakes to find a bright orange violation pending, formal hearing sign staked into the front yard. The sun hadn't yet cleared the tops of the pine trees when Caleb opened the front door and stepped into the crisp morning air. The scent of damp leaves lingered, and frost kissed the edges of the porch railing. But what really caught his attention was the flash of garish orange planted like a flag of conquest right in the middle of the lawn. He walked toward it, barefoot and blinking, the cold biting at his soles. The plastic sign wobbled slightly in the breeze. Violation pending, formal hearing. Notice of non-compliance. Section 14.8 inch. Beneath that, a timestamp, the upcoming Friday. Just 4 days away. Thomas appeared behind him, coffee in hand, dressed in flannel and slippers. He didn't look surprised. "They're trying to break you early," he said, sipping. "Did the same to old Clyde Jennings. Gave up and moved to Florida." Caleb pulled the sign from the ground with one firm motion and carried it inside. The community center looked like it had once been a schoolhouse, white paint peeling in strips, the bell tower long silent. Inside, the HOA hearing room was more sterile, linoleum floors, folding chairs in rows, a long table at the front where 5 board members sat in a neat line. A carafe of stale coffee sat untouched. No pastries. Just a tray of napkins and a stack of printed agendas. Only 2 residents had bothered to come. They sat quietly in the back, arms folded, eyes cast down as if attending a wake. Karen Winslow stood at the center table, her beige blazer perfectly pressed, clipboard held with both hands like a minister holding scripture. Her smile was tight. Polished. Practiced. "We'll begin with case 04-19, she said. "Pertaining to unauthorized lawn decor and driveway use." Caleb stepped forward, sleeves rolled, denim among pressed khaki. He spoke clearly, recounting the citation and raising questions about the legitimacy of the charges, referencing the now-deleted clause he'd found. For a moment, he thought Karen might blink. She didn't. "The board reviews all updates thoroughly," she said. "Legacy status is not relevant under current guidelines." Sandra cleared her throat. She sat beside him, in a burgundy sweater and silver brooch. Her tone was calm but firm. "I believe the clause was removed without full membership consent. According to Section 2.1b of the Charter, that requires a vote." She didn't finish. Mr. Alton, the HOA's legal representative, leaned forward with steepled fingers. "The board has the right to amend outdated clauses. In any case, this is not the venue for charter debates." Karen nodded once and shifted papers without meeting Sandra's eyes. Afterward, they stood outside beneath the drooping eaves of the center, the November air carrying the faint smell of pine sap and old insulation. She didn't even argue. "Just dismissed it," Caleb muttered. Sandra exhaled slowly. "There are things she's afraid of being seen. Especially that drive." He turned. "The what?" "A few years back, the board voted to install perimeter cameras, said it was about safety." Karen pushed for full coverage. Caleb's mind turned that over, gears beginning to click. "Then there's footage." "Not publicly available," Sandra said. "But it exists. Everything from driveway angles to mailbox zones. Could prove who's doing what, and when." He went home and dug through the charter again, flipping to a section Thomas had highlighted earlier. There, in small print, was the Transparency Access Act, a clause requiring HOA surveillance records be made available upon formal request by a resident for any active dispute. He typed up the request that evening, printed it on Thomas's old laser printer, and walked it straight to the HOA Dropbox across from the tennis courts. The street was quiet, lamps flickering on one by one, squirrels darting in the underbrush like restless shadows. The next morning, he received a typed envelope slipped under the door. He unfolded it carefully. Karen's handwriting was sharp, angled. "You'll have it, when we decide it's relevant." A plain brown envelope appears under Caleb's door. Inside, a flash drive labeled HOA Archive, November 2021. He stared at it for a long minute, thumb tracing the faded handwriting on the label. It hadn't been there when he stepped out back to water Thomas's geraniums just 10 minutes ago. No knock, no footsteps on the porch, just the quiet thunk of something sliding over the threshold. Caleb glanced out the window, but the street beyond was empty except for a squirrel flicking its tail on the mailbox. He turned it over in his palm. No return address. No note. Down in the backyard shed, the one he'd slowly turned into a tidy workspace of makeshift shelves and a salvaged desk, Caleb booted up his laptop. The place still smelled faintly of old cedar and fresh printer ink. The drive slid in with a soft click, and a single folder popped open, HOA_archive_1121. Inside, 10 video files. 2 labeled surveillance footage, the rest cryptically named with initials and dates. He clicked on the first. The grainy footage showed Karen standing next to a tow truck under the arc of an amber street lamp. She was gesturing sharply at an old RV parked by a modest ranch-style home. No warning sign, no orange sticker. Just Karen, clipboard in hand, and a driver reluctantly hooking chains to the axle. A man, gray hair, robe flapping, rushed out, shouting something the camera couldn't catch. Karen never turned to look at him. Caleb sat back, breath caught. The next clip was darker. A meeting room, late evening. Karen stood near a folding table, feeding what looked like ballots into a shredder. The hum of the machine swallowed the room's silence. She worked quickly, glancing over her shoulder once. He called Thomas into the shed. Thomas watched both videos without a word, leaning heavily on his cane. When they ended, he blew out a slow breath. "That RV belonged to old Greg," he said, voice husky. "Korean War vet. Lived off of Pecan Street." Karen cited him for non-conforming aesthetics. Told him to remove it or face daily fines. He moved to his daughter's in Tennessee a week later. Never came back. Caleb turned back to the screen. She shredded ballots. At the last vote. This isn't just control, this is cover-up. That evening, he sat on Sandra's porch with the binder of printed documents tucked under one arm. She poured them both iced tea, her hands shaking slightly. "I couldn't watch anymore," she admitted, eyes locked on the darkening horizon. "I saved those before I left the board. Karen told us security footage was rotated every 30 days, but I knew she kept copies. When I asked too many questions, she started citing me for things like overgrown ivy and non-standard mailbox post height. Harold built that post." Her voice cracked. Caleb handed her the leather binder she'd given him last week. "Then let's put it to use." They spent the next 2 hours sorting files, highlighting timestamps, listing names. Sandra worked with quiet determination, only pausing to rub at an old scar near her wrist. Caleb added tabs to the documents: tow orders, unauthorized surveillance, election tampering. It was all starting to take shape, more than just petty HOA overreach. A pattern. A case. As the sun slipped below the trees, Evelyn appeared with a loaf of banana bread wrapped in wax paper. "I figured you two could use something warm," she said, eyes kind. Then, with a glance over her shoulder, she added, "My son-in-law used to be a paralegal. Real good at catching what people try to hide in fine print." Inside the house, Thomas met them at the door with a yellowed folder, his own copy of the original HOA rules, from before Karen's time. "You'll want to compare Section 9, he said. She started rewriting things around the same time she cut off the Veterans Club. The three of them sat by the fireplace that night, papers spread out across the coffee table like a war map. Caleb began drafting a formal complaint addressed to the HOA board, citing abuse of power, procedural violations, and unethical governance. Sandra proofread every word, occasionally muttering, "Make them read every word." By midnight, the complaint was printed, signed, and sealed. Then the lights flickered. Caleb looked up. The house remained bright, the hallway lamp casting a warm pool of light across the entryway. But out the window, he saw it, the shed. Dark. Pitch black. He stood slowly, heart thudding. That night, the power to Caleb's shed goes out. The rest of the house is untouched. As Caleb restarts his work using a borrowed generator, a city inspector unexpectedly appears on the property. The buzz of the generator was just loud enough to drown out the birdsong. Caleb had wedged it behind the shed, trailing a thick orange cord into the workspace where he'd reassembled his laptop and scanners. The morning air still held that early November bite, but sunlight slanted through the trees in long, dappled rays. He was just labeling a folder, miscellaneous _HOA finance 2021, when a throat cleared behind him. Sir? City code compliance. Caleb turned. A man in a windbreaker and khakis stood near the porch, holding up a laminated badge. Clipboard in hand, tie slightly off-center and faded from too many washes. At the bottom of the clipboard, 3 sparkly stickers, mermaids, a heart, and something shaped vaguely like a turtle. Caleb stepped out, wiping his hands on his jeans. Morning. What's this about? The man gave him a tight smile. Received a complaint about an unpermitted electrical setup. Generator, cords, and shed, possible code violation. Just need to take a quick look. Sure, Caleb said, gesturing. It's temporary. The main power to the shed went out last night. This is just to keep my files from disappearing. The inspector nodded as he stepped toward the generator. Name's Wallace. I'll be quick. Says here the complaint came in just after midnight. Anonymous? Wallace didn't answer, just made a note on the clipboard. A voice called from next door. Careful, Wallace, Karen's allergic to innovation. Evelyn shuffled onto her porch in fuzzy slippers, holding a glass of sweet tea. Want some? You'll need it. Wallace cracked a smile. Appreciate it, ma'am, but I'm on the clock. As he checked the cable routes and grounding, Caleb watched him work. There was no aggression in the man's movements, just methodical attention. Wallace looked like someone who'd spent his career walking the line between rules and reason. Look, Caleb said, I'm not running a business out of here. Just sorting documents. Wallace grunted. Doesn't matter much to the city, unless it's permanent, we don't care. But someone wanted you red flagged. Lucky for you, I have bigger things to chase today. Just, maybe don't run that thing after dark. It echoes. By the time Wallace stepped off the lawn, Caleb had already decided on the next move. He drove to City Hall after lunch. Sandra met him outside, holding a canvas tote bulging with envelopes. Figured you'd be here. Inside, the municipal building was a cool maze of old carpet and flickering fluorescents. Caleb filed a clarification form at the front counter, confirming his property was zoned residential and not subject to business use inspections. The clerk, chewing gum languidly, waved him off with a rubber-stamped receipt. Back home, he unpacked a shipment that had arrived that morning, for solar-powered battery lights, a backup lithium pack, and a small inverter. By dusk, the shed glowed softly with clean energy. No cords. No complaints. That evening, Evelyn came over with a box of lemon bars. You always this handy? Only when threatened with bureaucracy, Caleb replied, brushing powdered sugar from his shirt. If Karen ran the town, we'd need permits to chew gum. They laughed, and for a moment the tension eased. Later, seated at the dining room table, he sorted through the printed HOA financial summaries Sandra had helped pull. One entry, miscellaneous legal, $8,143.82, caught his eye. No vendor, no invoice, just the number. He circled it in red ink. Found something? Thomas asked from the recliner. Maybe. Depends on what miscellaneous means in HOA language. Thomas chuckled without humor. Usually, it means whatever they don't want you to ask about. Caleb opened his laptop and began drafting a citizen transparency request under South Carolina's Public Records Code. If the HOA had handled any part of its enforcement through municipal channels, there would be paperwork. And if that $8,000 had gone to an outside law firm, or worse, personal accounts, it could crack open more than just bad policy. The screen flickered as he clicked submit. His phone buzzed. Sandra. He answered. Hey, what's... Caleb. Her voice was tight, hushed. She knows we're close. You'd better move that flash drive tonight. A fire truck and 2 sheriff vehicles roll into Brookpine Hills, not for an emergency, but for a permit enforcement inspection at Caleb's house. Fog still clung to the yard when Caleb stepped out, coffee in hand. He barely had time to take a sip before the distant rumble broke the quiet. First came the engine, a massive red firetruck easing onto the street, lights spinning lazily without the siren. Then two sheriff's cruisers crept in behind it, tires hissing on damp asphalt. Doors cracked open. Uniforms emerged. Radios buzzed. Across the street, curtains twitched. Porch doors opened. The air grew tight. Caleb set the cup down and walked down the steps slowly, hands visible. Evelyn was already outside, pink scarf over her shoulder. Sandra peeked through the side gate, worry etched on her face. From the lead cruiser, a broad man with a slow stride stepped forward, Sheriff Barnes, silver-haired and trim, known more for shaking hands at fairs than breaking up bar fights. "Mr. Moore," he greeted, voice low. "Got a call. Fire code enforcement. Supposed flammable hazards in your outbuilding." Caleb kept his tone even. "The solar setup certified. No cords, no fuel, just a battery system under the municipal wattage cap. Want to see the permits?" Barnes hesitated, then nodded. Caleb handed over a folder with neatly printed forms and time-stamped installation photos. The sheriff thumbed through the pages. Behind him, the fire chief conferred with another inspector near the shed. One of them crouched by the grass, measuring cable distance that no longer existed. The air shifted. Gravel crunched. Karen Winslow stepped out of her sedan. She wore beige again, blazer crisp, heels clicking on the sidewalk like punctuation. Her clipboard, ever present, was tucked under one arm. With her came a certain gravity, the kind that made people stiffen before realizing they weren't actually required to. She walked directly up to Caleb. "This isn't about your permit," she said smoothly. "It's about responsibility. You've created a hazard in a quiet community." "I followed every line of your own bylaw updates," Caleb replied, eyes steady. "I also filed for public records last week." Funny how quick this inspection showed up. Karen's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You endangered your neighbors." A voice called out. "What danger?" "The shed's cleaner than my kitchen." Murmurs rolled from the porches. Evelyn stepped forward and crossed her arms. "You always send fire trucks for solar panels, Karen?" Sheriff Barnes cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we're just here to check on compliance." Karen turned slightly. "And what's your verdict?" Barnes didn't answer immediately. From the house, a slow tapping echoed across the porch. Thomas Moore appeared at the top step, straight-backed in his Veterans Club jacket, cane ticking with every movement. "Caleb," he called. "Bring that binder." Caleb moved quickly, lifting the leather folder Sandra had given him. Thomas met him halfway, took it, and faced the crowd. "Brookpine Hills," he said, voice deep and calm, "was founded on shared trust. I was there when the charter was updated. I've seen it twisted ever since." He flipped to a marked tab. Section 4, Article 2, Legacy Exemption. No member owning property before the 2001 charter revision may be compelled to modify original structures or landscaping unless public safety is compromised. He turned a page. Article 7, Board elections shall maintain paper ballot backups, stored for no less than 1 calendar year. Another page. Financial clause, all legal disbursements must be publicly disclosed to membership within 30 days. Karen's jaw tightened. Thomas reached into his jacket and drew out a flash drive. "What you're looking at here," he said, offering it to Barnes, "is video proof of illegal towing, ballot tampering, and fund misuse." The sheriff hesitated only a second before taking it. Karen's face froze as Barnes radios in, "We may need county involvement." 1 week later, the HOA board resigns en masse. Karen doesn't attend the final meeting. The community hall had never been so full. Folding chairs scraped hardwood floors as neighbors, young and old, silent and spirited, filed in, some holding styrofoam cups of diner coffee, others just curious to see how it would end. The nameplates were gone. Only Sandra sat at the front table, flanked by Evelyn and Mr. Darnell, all three scanning notes scribbled onto legal pads. No gavel. No call to order. Just a room of people who had finally stopped whispering and started showing up. County officials stood near the back, taking down posters from the bulletin board. One of them, a tall woman in gray slacks, handed Sandra a stamped notice: Brookpine Hills HOA charter status, suspended pending review. There were a few quiet cheers. One man clapped once, then stopped, unsure if that was allowed. Karen's seat remained empty. Someone left a local paper on the front row. Bold headline across the fold: HOA overreach crumbles under veterans' watchful eye. Below it, a photo from the week before, Thomas standing on the porch in his old jacket, cane pointed like punctuation. Karen, in the background, mouth half open, blurred by motion. Caleb stayed near the exit. He'd come out of respect, not interest. He'd already said no when Sandra asked if he'd serve on the transition board. "I just wanted peace," he'd said. "Not power." Later that afternoon, he was back where he preferred to be, kneeling by Evelyn's weather-worn fence, hammer in hand. She passed him nails while chatting about her plans for a proper rose arbor next spring. Occasionally, a neighbor walked by and nodded, or dropped off a plate wrapped in foil. Baked ziti. Banana bread. A pecan pie that looked like it came from a magazine. Even Darnell offered a handshake, firm, but with eyes that still held worry, as if years of quiet frustration couldn't dissolve in a week. "Give it time," Caleb said, wiping his brow with a sleeve. When the last slat was nailed in, Evelyn clapped her hands gently. "Harold would have loved this," she murmured. "He always said fences were meant to keep dogs in, not people out." That night, the porch smelled of fresh lumber and cinnamon. Thomas was already settled in his rocking chair, a folded newspaper on his lap, a wool blanket across his knees. The creak of the swing kept rhythm with the occasional breeze. A mug of tea sat on the railing beside him. Caleb joined with a quiet sigh. His shoulders dropped in a way they hadn't for months. Thomas didn't speak at first. He just reached into a weathered folder and held it out. Inside, the original homeowner deed, aged, edges curled. And below Thomas's signature, a second name added in crisp black ink. Caleb blinked. "You serious?" Thomas nodded once. "It's your porch now. Just don't forget who fought for it." Caleb swallowed. The dusk painted the yard in amber and crimson. Across the street, a boy ran barefoot, laughing as he launched a paper airplane that looped once, then dove into a pile of leaves. A woman in a navy blazer passed by, heels clicking on the sidewalk. She paused, looked up at the house, and tilted her head. "Nice house," she called out. "Thinking of selling?" Caleb smiled and responded, "Not a chance." The porch swing creaked again, but this time, it echoed peace, not tension. In a town once ruled by silent rules and louder fear, one man's steady refusal to back down reminded everyone what neighborly courage looks like. When power forgets its purpose, it takes more than a signature to restore trust. It takes shared voices, quiet persistence, and a little sunlight. Perhaps it's never too late to sit beside someone, pass the sweet tea, and ask, "What can we fix together?" Like a front yard finally cleared of weeds, justice just needed a little tending.